Hey, my good people. Thank you for joining us once again. Let me just actually, we're gonna got some issues. I got a little.
Oh, by the way,
Yes, sir.
I just want to add, is it possible to do like a background noise filtering kind of thing? Is it possible? Because I'm at my in-laws' house, and it's an Italian family, so
There's not a lot I
they.
can do for that. Hopefully, I don't mess with things technically like that. But yeah, uh, my advice is speak loud, and that way,
Yeah,
like, you
yeah.
talk over the top of it. But yeah. So just getting started here. This is Kicking Ideas, and uh what I'm wearing right now is an interesting cap. And it's kind of a do rag. It's because my hair is a bit out of control. Uh, so if you're yeah, if if you're wondering why am I got this weird hat on, this is actually a King of the Mountain cap from cycling. If you see anybody that's got like all the red dots or just like the spotted jerseys, that means that they are a King of the Mountain person. That means they're good at hill climbing. And I'm actually running a hill climb event this this May, 1st and 2nd of May, here in Ikeda. We're gonna have a massive hill climb event where we'll climb the hill 4 times, and it will be uh, quite an amazing race. So um, that's why I'm wearing this hat, is kind of to promote that, and also because my hair is a complete mess. And
Same
I
here.
have with me again, I have with me again, uh, Davy, and Davy is going to speak all in Portuguese. And yeah, we talked last time and about a little bit about his story, and this time he's going to kind of interview me for my story, and we're going to talk a little bit about just about a lot of things, and kind of, like, as we say, kicking ideas. So thank you, Kicking Ideas followers, and thank you for putting up with this silly hat today. Okay, go ahead, Davey.
Alright, so, em português, né? Já ia começar. Quando eu ligo o Zoom, já estou acostumado a dar as minhas aulas, daí eu já começo falando inglês. Associou. Então, na última vez que eu apareci aí no Kicking Dias, a gente conversou um pouquinho, né? Você explicou que você foi meu professor na escola, né? Aí, beleza. Eu entrei na escola brasileira, tudo normal. Aí, um belo dia surgiu um professor. Aí, já antes do professor entrar, começou já o burburinho, ó, professor gringo, tá, professor estrangeiro e tal. Aí chegou o Robert, né? Aí o Robert se apresentou, professor americano e tal. Então a gente, não que isso faça diferença, mas a gente começou a falar com ele como a gente falaria com o americano. Não sei se isso faz sentido ou se ficou até. Não me cancelem, por favor, porque não é xenofobia. Mas, enfim, Robert, para a gente, era um professor americano, mas depois ele foi contando um pouquinho mais a história dele. Aí a gente ficou sabendo que ele tinha influência da América do Sul. Como que foi essa coisa toda? De onde que vem esse sul-americano em você?
Okay, so actually, I'm yeah, my father is Peruvian, and so I have the influence of him in the house and the culture that comes from having a Peruvian father. And I grew up in a small town in the United States, but one of the good things about my mom was she would always let us know that we were Peruvian, that we had Peruvian roots, and she would often tell us small historical things. From my father's side, it was what he lived, but he wasn't really interested in Peru. He was more interested in being a cowboy. So when I was a young boy, uh, I was a 100% like cowboy, that was
Aham,
what I was going to be. I loved riding horses and those kind of things. Yeah.
massa.
Yeah. So that was back. I was born in 1977. And when I was born, my parents, they lived in the middle of the mountains in Utah. And yeah, that was that's where I come from.
Aham. Então você cresceu mais na área de Utah.
Yeah, I grew up in Utah. How can I say? I grew up basically from the time I was one, or just born, until I was about 4 or 5 years old. We lived essentially in the mountains. There was not. We did not live in a city or in a even like a town. We just lived out in the mountains. And I remember we lived in a cabin for a while, just one cabin. There was no running water. I remember those things. And then when we got a bit older, when I got older, they want time to go to school. They moved into a town that was called I believe the name of the town was Sutherland. It's not even like a proper town. It was just like a few houses stringed together. And I
Ah,
remember living in that town called Sutherland. That was when I was just about 5 years old.
legal, legal. Quando você falou que você morava no cabin, né? Agora eu esqueci a palavra para isso em português. No chalé, né, lá em cima das montanhas, a imagem que veio foi o urso vindo destruir o acampamento e o Robert lá com o machado tentando espantar o urso. Tinha
You know,
muito urso na região? Ou...
yeah, so there's definitely bears in the area, but there were not a lot of them, because in Utah everybody kind of has a gun, and so if a bear shows up, he's toast. Like, there's no problem. With most cases, if that's what would happen. So bears steer clear of humans mostly in Utah for sure. Um, and I never saw a bear in when I was in Utah. There were black bears supposedly there. I did see dead bears occasionally. But I never saw a live bear. Now, one thing that when we lived in the cabin that would happen, it's such a strange thing, is there was skunks. Do you know what a skunk is?
Sim, tipo gabá, né? Gabá, gambá, né?
Yeah, they're the ones that make a bad smell.
Isso, isso. Aqui
Yeah,
no Brasil a gente tem o gambá, mas também tem o cangambá, né? Tem uma diferençazinha, mas o skunk vai ser o gambá.
right. So the skunk we had, which there were skunks. They would fight underneath the cabin. There was, because the cabin has a floor that's up, and then underneath the cabin the skunks would go and they'd fight, and occasionally they'd spray. And so, like, that place smelled like skunk a lot of the time. Uh, because once those skunk sprays, it's it's there for a while. So for me, every time I smell that skunk spray, that smell, it brings me back to when I was living in the cabin with my family when I was just young. And it's actually for a lot of people, they hate this skunk smell. I really like it. That's just like, oh, that's back when I was home. It smells like home. So when I was a very small child. Yeah.
Eu
So,
nunca senti o cheiro, mas eu acho que não seria para mim, não.
no,
É,
it's a very it's very strong. It's actually a painful smell. Like, if I can make a sense of that, it like smells painful. It's like for most people, and even for me, when I get too much of it. But just having just a tinge of it in the air, just like, oh, and I go, oh, that's it. I haven't smelt it at all in Japan because we don't have skunks. Yeah.
acabei de pensar em piada, não vou fazer não. E você quando antes de sair de casa, tá, você morou só nos Estados Unidos ou você morou algum tempo no Peru? Passou alguma
Right.
temporada,
So
visitou?
I lived in the United States until I was 19 years old. And at the age of 19, I moved. Grew up in Utah, so I grew up Mormon. A lot of people ask that question. Said, were you from Utah? I grew up Mormon. I grew up Mormon, and then when I was 19, I served a Mormon mission, which that means you
Então,
go.
você saiu mais no contexto de sair para fazer peregrinação, então.
Excuse me?
É que, tipo assim, você cresceu em Utah, né? Saiu com 19 anos, e é bem a época que os mormons fazem a peregrinação deles, né?
Yeah,
Você
that's
saiu
right.
nesse contexto de fazer essa peregrinação ou foi coincidência?
No. I went as a missionary. I was a missionary for the Mormon faith, and I learned. It was a lot of. We went to what do you call it? The name of it is the MTC, the Missionary Training Center. That's in Provo, Utah, and I went there to learn Spanish. So that's where I first learned Spanish, because even though I'd grown up with my father speaking Spanish and around me and hearing it, I didn't really speak it. Now, I think I spoke it fairly well when I was a little child, like 2 and 3 and 4, because like when we lived in the mountains, there was my mom, and then there were a lot of Peruvians that would come around,
Sim.
and so I would speak Spanish with them. Yeah.
Legal. Essa coisa de ter gente que fala espanhol nos Estados Unidos é bem interessante, porque os brasileiros, pelo menos os que não são, não vou falar que não tem muita informação, mas tipo, eles estão vivendo num contexto de Brasil, o que eles vão querer saber de Estados Unidos, né? Mas daí, então, muita gente não sabe, mas tem bastante gente que fala espanhol nos Estados Unidos, né?
Oh, yeah.
Na sua região, era uma coisa comum ou não tanto? Porque, tipo assim, se for para... isso daí eu nunca fui, então eu vou chutar o número, tá? Vou só chutar o número. Você anda em alguns lugares, você passa o dia inteiro e encontra, tipo, uma pessoa que fala espanhol. Você vai para outro lugar, mais para perto dos centros, né, onde tem mais estrangeiro, aí você passa o dia inteiro e encontra 5 pessoas. Mas, por exemplo, se você for para Miami, você sai da porta de casa e já escuta alguém falando espanhol, português, né, bastante coisa. Na sua área tinha bastante ou era mais incomum?
Okay, so in Utah, for the longest time, we, as I said, like until I was like 5, we lived around Peruvians because other Peruvians would work at the same place where my father worked. My father came to the United States as a sheep herder, meaning that he would take care of sheep in the United States, in the back country of the United States. And so he would, that was his job. And that's when he met my mom. He was only about 19 when he came to the United States. So he stayed there and did that. But the sheep herding thing, he stopped doing that once I got to be 5 years old, because I had to, couldn't be moving around the same way. At least that's what they thought. And then I started going to regular school. Once I started going to regular school, there were no Spanish speakers around. And so I didn't touch Spanish until I went into the MTC. I mean, I had it in high school, but it wasn't, it's kind of a joke, right? I mean, sorry, it's like, that's my profession.
É tipo inglês para a escola brasileira.
Right. It's kind of a joke for most people. Now, sorry, Spanish teacher.
Não, sorry também, especialmente que você foi meu professor, mas aqui no Brasil, tipo, no Japão era um pouquinho melhor, porque eles tinham acesso a professores estrangeiros, mas aqui no Brasil também é muito ruim. Inglês de escola pública, meu Deus do céu.
Yeah.
Verb to be, 6 anos.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually the real problem, is that they teach grammar. But the next thing that I did is, so I went over and I was in Panama for 2 years as a missionary. And part of being a missionary is you got to talk to everybody. And so, of course, you talk to everybody, you learn the language. So, within about 6 months, I was speaking just about as well as I do now. Spanish is always an easier language for me because I was around it when I was a child. And then I had a motivation after finishing a mission, or after finishing my time in Panama. I had the motivation that I could talk to my dad in Spanish. And so that was a pretty big motivation for learning Spanish well.
Legal, legal. Uma coisa bem interessante eu não sabia que você tinha crescido nesse ambiente mormon e tal, mas é bem interessante porque eu dou aula de inglês, né? E o livro que eu estou usando agora, o livro do meu pai, ele foi desenvolvido a partir do método mormon, né? Os mormons, para quem não sabe, né? Os mormons, quando fazem, não sei se 18 ou 19, mas quando eles completam uma certa idade, eles têm que ir para outro país para fazer peregrinação, para serem missionários, né? Só que nem o Robert disse, se você vai no lugar, você tem que falar a língua do lugar, né? E como os mormons têm feito isso por, não sei tantos anos, mas bastante tempo, né? Eles meio que se especializaram nesse ensino de língua. E é bem interessante, porque o livro que eu uso, ele foi baseado nesse método, né? Aquela universidade brighamiana, que é dos mormons, que desenvolveu. Então é bem interessante, isso eu não sabia que você vinha desse ambiente.
Yeah, there's a lot of with Mormons. What the interesting thing was, they've had, from the foundation of the church, they had sent missionaries to different countries, and within the United States as well. Not all missionaries go outside of the United States. They usually go a little ways away from home, at least, but they'll go, for example, the kids from Utah, they'll end up in Nebraska, or end up in Colorado or somewhere else. But they generally they send you quite as far away as they can, and then they bring people from outside of Utah to serve missions inside of Utah. So there's actually, it's interesting that there's actually Mormon missionaries in Utah. that's the really interesting thing. But yeah, so with that, they have a missionary training center where you study the language for about 2 months, very intensive training, and you go in not speaking a word, maybe, and you come out essentially fluent.
Só repete isso daí, por favor, porque isso daí é importante para mim. Você entra sem repetir uma palavra. Quanto tempo você já está falando? Quanto tempo que é o curso?
2 months.
Aí, gente, 2 meses. 2 meses você consegue aprender inglês fluente.
Okay, so let me clarify. That's the hardest studying I've ever done in my life.
Tem essa também.
Right? I mean, it's 8 hours a day, and you're prohibited, like, not like prohibited like with like any kind of punishment, but you're expected to speak only that language, your target language, from the first day in until the end, and you're always challenging each other to do it. So it's like, if somebody starts speaking in English, you say, wait a minute, what language do you speak? You have to speak Tagalog, or you have to speak Chinese, and they legit, like, push each other to be able to speak their language. So I had people talking to me in German. I had people talking to me in Japanese. I had people talk, and that wasn't my language, but you're supposed to, even when you're interacting with other missionaries from other speaking countries.
Entendeu, se não entender.
Yeah. It's of course they don't really follow 100%, but a lot of, like, because it's religion, right? A lot of people will go, that's their faith, so they push really hard. In my case, I think I spoke more Spanish in that 8 weeks. In those 8 weeks, 8 hours a day in the classes, and then out of class, trying to speak as much Spanish as possible. I think I did more Spanish training than somebody would do in you know, 5-6 years of regular school,
Aham,
or, you know,
sim.
like 10 years of a course. Because that's the other thing, is like, if you're taking a course, and this is the point with the courses, it's a good idea to take a course, but if you don't make it as intense as possible when you're not in class, you're not going anywhere.
É,
And if you want to
é
go
que
somewhere
nem
fast, you got to get in there and dig.
é que nem fazer academia, né? É, eu não sou muito de falar de academia, né? Porque eu tenho o físico super preparado, né? Mas é que nem fazer academia. Se você vai para academia, tipo, 2 vezes por semana, em dia separado, assim. Aí
Mhm.
chega em casa e começa a comer besteira tudo de novo, para que você tá indo na academia, né?
Exactly. It's just, it makes no difference at all if you don't practice it outside of the you know, outside of where you're at. That's the
É,
main problem, is that people don't, you know, generally speaking, people don't practice their language. And when I was in the MTC, then that missionary training center, everybody was pretty fanatic about, you know, keeping the rules, and one of the rules was speak your language. And so,
é.
you know, that I remember, I remember some guy just like, I was talking to him in Spanish the whole time, and I was trying to make my point, you know, and he was speaking back in English because he was an English speaker, and like, I understood everything he was saying. He's like, bro, I can't understand anything you're saying. And I was like, oh, and I just kept into it because I was quite, you know, again, fanatical almost about it. Um,
Aham,
but finishing up that was a really good um, uh, experience, and then I went to Panama, and that within 6 months I was speaking pretty much, like I said, like pretty much native speaker. So you can go from zero to almost native level in about 8 months if you're completely dedicated. There's still
aham,
stuff in Spanish that I don't know, but I mean,
aham,
essentially, for any kind of regular, normal conversation, normal expectation of being able to explain things, that and in 8 months I was pretty much able to do any explanation I needed, and I was
legal.
completely at home in the language. I didn't feel uncomfortable at all.
Massa. Aí minha última pergunta, que na verdade é dividida em duas, né? Como que você aprendeu espanhol, né? O espanhol é parecidíssimo com o português, mas também não, né? Ele é parecido, mas não é parecido. Como que passou do espanhol para o português e isso foi antes de você ir para o Japão, depois de ir para o Japão, e como você foi parar lá no Japão?
Awesome. Okay, so that's a lot of questions. So when I was in when I got back from the mission, I decided I would you know, go get some schooling, get some learning, and I went to the community college. It's called Snow College, and I went to this community college in Utah. It's really quite an awesome place. If you're going to go to study abroad in the United States, I really recommend going to a small community college in the United States to study. The reason why is because there's so much more, like what they say, community, like people just talking to each other, and people you know, interacting with each other. And so if you're a foreigner and you go into the big city, nobody cares about you. If you're in a big university, nobody cares about you.
É,
You know, unless you're super beautiful or you're super you know, cool. Nobody's gonna
eu
talk to
poderia
you.
ir então, eu poderia ir então,
Yeah,
tranquilo.
yeah, this married man. Anyway, so, yeah, but if you go there, you'd enjoy it because it was a lot of fun, and the students and the faculty are really chill. And then you have like classes are relatively small. But getting back to where I learned Portuguese, I was taking a Japanese class. So I took a Japanese class, and inside the Japanese class there was one of the students there. Her name was Kachi Nishimura, and so she was the typical Nikkei, right? What we say over here in Japan, as a Brazilian who was of Japanese descent, right? And so in her case, she had lived in Japan for some years and gotten some money saved up so she could go and study abroad. And then she came over to Snow College because, again, it was a really great place to learn language. But anyway, she was in my Japanese class, and she said, "I'm from Brazil," and I was like, "What? You're from Brazil? That doesn't make sense." And also, what are you doing in Japanese class, Nishimura? And then she said, "Well, let's make a deal. I'll speak to you all in Portuguese. You speak to me all in Spanish." And that's what ended up happening. So yeah, that was my first entry into Portuguese. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can basically get this, you know. So if I put the same effort into Portuguese as I did into Spanish, in a few months, I'll have that down. The trouble was, even though Kachi and I hung out quite a bit, you're at school, she wasn't my girlfriend or nothing, so we didn't hang out that much, so we would just hung out whenever we could, and so speak some Portuguese. She'd speak Portuguese to me, I'd speak Spanish back to her, but that wasn't helping me speak Portuguese. So after a bit of school, I tried to get a job in Japan as an English teacher, and I did, and I came over to Japan, and almost immediately I found Brazilians in Japan, and I just found it a lot easier to talk to them than it was to talk to Japanese people, for cultural reasons, as well as for linguistically. Spanish is a lot closer than English or Spanish is to Japanese, and so I picked up like almost 99% of my Portuguese that I ended up speaking. I picked it up here in Japan, and then at a certain point, and I went to work in Brazilian schools as an English teacher, and that was an amazing experience that helped me to really perfectionar. How do I say that in English? To really perfect.
Perfect, yeah.
To really perfect my English. That's how, not my English, perfect my Portuguese. See, even sometimes with Portuguese is easier to come up with than my English at this point. Because I do speak a lot of Portuguese. Most of my friends that I would consider like friends are either foreigners from United States or foreigners from Brazil or some other country. But generally speaking, I don't speak a lot of Japanese. I don't have. I think it's interesting. I have like one Japanese friend, and he's half American, so we only speak in English anyway. But so I don't really have a lot of Japanese friends, which is another thing that's interesting. So yeah.
Massa.
Does that answer your question?
Sim, perfeito. Aí, para mim, acho que essas são todas as perguntas. Se você tiver, acho que você tem
So
algumas
there was
também,
a question you had beforehand when we were talking about the way that people perceive Brazil in the movies, and the way that people perceive America in the movies. I remember we were talking about that in the chats before this. And how much do you really want to know about that?
O básico, eu tenho uma noção, porque, por exemplo, estou assistindo lá o filme, né? Aí, primeiro que tem o adolescente de 15 anos que parece o Chris Hemsworth de bombado, né? Aí ele desce para tomar café da manhã antes de ir para a escola, dá tempo da mãe dele ter levantado, pôr a mesa inteirinha, né? Aí tem bacon, torrada, suco, iogurte, 2 opções ainda, cereal, ele vai lá, come. Aí o pai sai, faz a gravata, aí vai para o trabalho, dá tempo dele levantar, pegar o almoço dele, ir para o ônibus e ainda chegar na escola. Aí ele chega na escola, dá tempo dele conversar com todo mundo, dá tempo do bullying da escola ir lá e atormentar ele, aí começa a escola. Então, tipo, o básico é que a gente vê de filme é isso, né?
I see. So you're talking about
estereótipo mesmo.
Okay, so all of the stereotypes, like, I'm going to be honest with you, like all of the stereotypes that America puts in their films are kind of the ideal state of how things should be. Is like how we perceive that they should be as Americans as well. So that's part of the propaganda. It's a very useful propaganda that shows the expectation of the reality that is, that we want. So everybody, if they're not living that standard, if they don't have those cool parents who make nice breakfast, if they don't have all those things that are in those nice 1990s, early 2000s and 80s kind of style of the United States, if they don't have all of those things, then they think, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my situation? Why don't I have those things? It must be because of some external reason I don't have it. But I guess for people from abroad, you're like, wow, that's how it is. And in fact, some people, maybe their life is like that, but I think everybody's life is a little bit like, for example, this is an example. I when I was 16 years old in the United States, I drive a car? Yes. No, I actually didn't. I was actually terrible at driving, and I didn't get my license until I was about 17. And then
Qual que foi o primeiro carro que você já dirigiu? Primeiro carro seu?
that was mine. It was a used Ford Monarch. 19.
Outra coisa daí, porque no filme o cara vai pegar o primeiro carro, aí que ele pega um Dodge Charger, um Challenger, um Mustang 69.
Right. Well,
né?
that's completely possible. It depends on if the parents are rich. You know, my best friend when I was growing up, I had a couple of best friends, but one of my best friends, his dad gave him a BMW. He used BMW, but it was a BMW, and he would drive a BMW to school. Another of my friends, his father said, no, you guys aren't going to have any cars because I don't want you having cars. So it wasn't that he didn't have money, it's just that he wasn't going to do that. And then another of my friends, they put their own car together, So there's a whole gambit. In my case, I didn't have a car because I couldn't drive, because I was a terrible driver. I still am. That's why I don't drive anymore. I'm just a horrible driver. I always crash the cars. They're not like big crashes, just little bumps, and it's expensive and it's horrible. But yeah, so I did that, and yeah, my first car was a Ford Monarch, a very old automatic transmission. We used to call it a grandma car because a lot of grandmas would drive those. It's big, really big. Yeah, but it was nice. I liked it. Yeah, that was.
E quando você chega na escola, tem aquela coisa também, todo mundo conversando no locker.
Yeah, that's totally true, man. We're just hanging out and chilling before class. Yeah.
E dá tempo de acordar.
So
porque, por exemplo, não, pode falar.
Yeah, so we have a busing system. So buses come from a lot of different places. The first bus that arrives drops off the children or the students, and they'll start walking around the halls, and you've got about 20-30 minutes before your first class starts, and you got to get your stuff, get to your locker. You have a locker, you open up the locker, you get out your stuff, you put your locker back together, and then you head to class. Yeah, and when you get to class.
Mas daí, por exemplo, o povo lá da escola, eles dormem cedo ou dormem normal, tarde? E, por exemplo, para a gente na escola, né? Aí também saindo da bolha porque é escola brasileira, não tem nada a ver. Mas, por exemplo, ninguém vai dormir 9, 10 horas da noite quando você está na escola. Né? Você vai para o quarto, mas daí fica jogando videogame, ou liga, ou fica no Facebook. Hoje em dia é Facebook, WhatsApp.
Okay, so we got okay, so my generation, we had TV. Okay, we didn't have, and here's the thing: is even TV, if you didn't have cable TV, if you had just regular TV, that ended up like at 12 o'clock midnight, a little bit after 12, that they'd stop programming from around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. It would just have no programming.
E daí o povo ia dormir.
Yeah, I mean, of course, what else are you going to do? I read a book, I guess, but if you, I mean, so but in my case, my parents had a strict curfew. We would just had to go to bed around 9. So I was in bed by 9:30, you know, until I was in high school. Even in high school, I would go to bed around 9:30 and I would just go to sleep because we didn't
Mas por
have.
que eu falo? Porque pra gente, por exemplo, na escola, né? A gente ficava fazendo qualquer coisa que a gente fizesse quando não tava dormindo, sei lá. Chegava na escola morto, parecendo um zumbi. Antes do primeiro café não tinha conversa, né? Aí, por exemplo, saía, acordava 5 minutos atrasado para chegar na escola para dar tempo de talvez comprar um café para chegar morto na sala e tentar sobreviver às 3 primeiras aulas, entendeu? Aí como eu fico vendo filmes como que dava tempo de pegar o ônibus, não, pegar o ônibus tudo bem, mas chegar na escola, dá tempo de você conversar com todos os seus amigos, dá tempo do bullying da escola se sentir incomodado porque você tem amigo, atravessar o campus da escola, te perseguir, aí você vai para aula e não sei o quê.
Well, of course, there's some exaggeration in that. I mean, it's only about 15, 20 minutes tops that you have before school. You know, when I was in elementary school, we'd go out and we'd play. I mean, I saw at EAS, there's kids playing ping pong early morning, you know. It's all you high school kids that were like staying up till 2 a.m.
Não, mas eles não eram pessoas de verdade, é tudo lagarto que não dorme, disfarçado, não é possível. Como que tem energia, disposição e tempo para jogar ping-pong? Tem não.
Well, you guys, as I said, like you guys would stay up way too late, you know, like that's. I mean, if you go to bed at if you go to bed at a normal hour, like 10 o'clock, let's just say 10 o'clock or even 11. If you go to bed at 11 and then you wake up around 7, you're fine. You know, you're gonna have plenty of sleep. But if you wake up, you know, if you have to wake up at 6 a.m. and you decide to go to bed at like 3, of course you're gonna be tired. You know, 3 hours sleep is not enough. 4 hours sleep isn't enough, especially when you're in high school. You should be sleeping way more. So, you know, that's the thing. Is like my parents were super strict about it, so I had plenty of sleep. So I never really felt that way. Like I noticed you guys were zombies in your school, but it's like, yeah, if you guys stayed up late, and then if you you know, you didn't get any coffee in you, you know. And seriously, the first class, I'd hate to be the teacher that has the first class. I think I had the first class sometimes with 1 or 2 classes. It was quite tough because everybody was still kind of like in that almost sleeping mode. So yeah, but yeah, that's when it is the same in America too. Like we might have time. Some people didn't have time. Some people were sleepy. I had people sleeping in my classrooms. You know, that was not unnormal, or that was, yeah, it was pretty normal to have them sleeping, somebody sleeping in class or somebody tired. Yeah.
Massa. E daí a parte, tipo, não só dos Estados Unidos, mas como que o Brasil é visto fora do Brasil. Você já passou aqui no Brasil alguma vez?
No, I've never actually been to Brazil. So I don't know.
Qual que é a ideia que você tem do Brasil?
Well, so
você esperaria?
So when I think it was 1999 or 2001 or 2000, something like that, there was a film that came out from Brazil that became internationally famous. I think it was like, I think it might have won Film of the Year or whatever. It's called Cidade de Deus.
Ótimo.
Right. So basically everybody from that movie coming out, that's Brazil for everybody. So it's like Brazil is a city of God, and that, I think that's where, like, generally speaking, if people, the first thing that comes to my mind is city of God when I think of Brazil. So the other thing about it is, and I know that that's not all Brazil, because Brazil is an enormous country, but I also know that, like, I lived in Panama, and Panama, where I lived in Panama, it was a lot like Ciudad de Deus. Okay, very, very similar. So when I saw Cidade de Deus, I said, oh, well, Brazil's just like Panama.
Aham,
And in that way, I mean, like I lived in favela, okay, like inside favela for
aham.
about 6, 7 months. But we could talk more about that the next time we get together, because we're about running up on the time spot. But
Aham, sim.
you know, yeah, the way that Americans perceive Brazil, and I'm gonna give you one other point. This might sound offensive, and maybe not as much true now, but in the '90s, Americans didn't think about any other country.
Aham.
Like other countries don't really exist for Americans. It's like
É,
Acre for Brazilians. It's like Acre.
é,
The rest of
é muito maravilhoso que você conhece essa piada. É muito bom que você conhece essa piada.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, yeah, it's like Acre for Brazilians. It does. The rest of the world is just like Acre for Brazilians. If we're not fighting a war with you,
Ah,
you don't exist. You know,
é,
that's that's the way. If we haven't fought you in a war, if we're not fighting you in a war, you
aham,
know, if we're not pretending, or if we're not pretending, if we're not planning to go and fight a war with you, then you don't really exist in the eyes of Americans.
é o Acre, é o Acre.
Yeah, it's Acre, and and that's that.
Exactly.
You know, but that's why people need to understand that you know, Americans generally, and it might be the most upsetting thing about us is that we generally, and I speak as generals, I don't speak for myself, generally speaking, they don't think about other countries at all. And here's my point is, even if they think about other countries, they're not going to do anything particularly to hurt or to help any other country unless it helps them, right? So eh, that's the way America kind of works, and the people, you know, they in a lot of terms, I would say, like internationally, they're much more ignorant than the rest of the world, because the rest of the world, at least you know America. You know, at
Aham,
least you know what I mean, like the rest of the world, at least you know America, but America doesn't know anybody else, you know. To
aham.
a certain extent we know Mexico, but that's because it's our neighbor. To a certain extent we know Canada, but that's because it's our neighbor, and we really don't care in the general. If you talk to like when I was living there, and again, this is years and years ago, so it might have changed now. I doubt it, um, but it might have changed. So I have to make that clear. People didn't uh, care, or it didn't even enter their mind to think about another country. Now, I'm going to say the same thing. I'll bet if you talk to the majority of Brazilians living in Brazil, other countries don't enter into their mind. Like
É, não.
people like you and me, they do, because we've lived abroad. We've been to
Aham,
other countries. So for us, it's interesting. For some other people, they're really not interested. That's why, like our
aham,
audience, the people who are going to listen to Kicking Ideas, they're really interested. but
aham.
but people who are not listeners to Kicking Ideas, they're not interested. And so
Só que tem uma coisa do brasileiro também. O brasileiro, ele, que nem você falou, não pensa muito nos países. Agora, sei lá, parece que tem metade da população ou odeia os Estados Unidos, aí, tipo, fica aquela coisa, não conhece, não sabe nada, mas odeia, né? E a outra parte, tipo, não conhece nada, não sabe nada, nunca, sei lá, não pretende conhecer nada, mas fala dos Estados Unidos, ó, ó grande, poderosa nação, né?
You know,
Então,
again, it's propaganda that's come from the United States in the form of their media, in the form of their, you know, Hollywood makes a lot of, you know, pro-U.S. propaganda. Almost all of
uh,
the sports is, you know, the major sporting events there in the United States, they're all propaganda. But because people think that they get that image of the United States as that, and you know, there's everything. There's poverty, there's you know, farming places. As I said, I grew up in a cabin with no, you know, running water, and we had to go to the
uh,
well and get water out of the well. There was no toilets, the plumbing was not there. Skunks were fighting underneath the boards. That's what I grew up in when I was a little kid. So that everything that is dealt with in the rest of the world is dealt with in the United States. It's just that what the United States chooses to show everybody is what they choose to show everybody. So the
Yeah.
media is, again, it's like the media will show something, but it's not even close to reality. What did you think about Japan before you got here? And then you see Japan. This is what you think
Nossa,
of Japan.
totalmente diferente.
There's Japan.
Totalmente
Everybody's like,
diferente.
wow, there's this big mountain that's sitting in the back of everybody's yard. You know that, you know, because that's what you see,
É,
right? There's everybody's. You can see Mount Fuji from wherever you are in Japan because that's where you know, everybody thinks. But the reality is really different. It's like you see some of those memes
é.
where they're like expectation and reality. You know, it's like expectation of Japan and then like reality. There's a guy standing in a factory. You know,
7-Eleven.
right, right, going into a 7-Eleven or whatever. And so that's what I think is the main thing. Don't, if I had any advice for anybody, is like, don't let the stereotypes or the images put up fool you. Go out and see for yourself what things really are, and go out and talk to people and find out who they really are. That's my
Não,
advice to everybody. Yeah.
massa.
So thank you again for
Mas
the
o
interview. Uh,
obrigado eu pelo convite.
yeah, and the next time we talk, we're gonna have a topic about probably something that is a lot more controversial, and hopefully something that you and I don't agree on, so that we can really,
Muita treta. Muita
yeah,
treta.
yes, so we can actually kick some ideas around and do it in a proper way. We'll show how people how to argue about things in a respectful manner, because you and I are always
Aham.
in some kind of disagreement on Facebook, you know.
É,
But it's always, I think that it's always a matter of respect, you know. And so
acho que não é nem respeito. Tipo, o povo quer mostrar a ideia e, tipo, se você pegar a minha ideia, pegou. Se não pegar, cancela. E, tipo,
yeah,
não. Ouve a ideia. Pelo menos dá uma chance, né?
yeah. So thank you, viewers, for watching this. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And hopefully you'll be able to watch our next video, where I will not have this nappy do-rag on. I will have a proper hair combed or something. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, Davey.